Hi guys, Sven Nelson, C2C Resources, also known as the guy that gets you paid. I'm here with a friend and client of mine, April Murray, Next Level CFO. April's been in the accounting and finance world for over 30 years. Spent 27 years with Louisiana Pacific, and CFO at Tetra. How do you say that?
Integra.
Integra. Okay, yeah, I knew I was going to mess that up. And recently VP of Accounting Operations at Warner Music.
Yeah.
After many, many years in the corporate world, she decided to be a fractional CFO working with other companies. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing there at Next Level CFO, April.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me. And yeah, so I'm excited to work with businesses that are growing and maybe expanding, or maybe just want to get their financials dialed in, and I come in and help them on a fractional basis. And sometimes lead their accounting team, or also just work with the CEO and business owners to help do their strategy and tighten up some of their numbers so they can get prepared for the next step.
Great, great. That's awesome. That's a very needed process for a lot of companies that, really can't afford a full-time CFO, but definitely need somebody out there with some higher level education or accounting experience. So that's definitely a well-needed service. So, I talk a lot off camera. We talk a lot about, just different things, various things within the business world. We always enjoy each other's conversations. So I wanted to get you on here and kind of get your perspective of, from a CFO standpoint or the CFO's role, how do they perceive collections or, the AR function? Do they really get involved in the day to day, or kind of explain what you've seen in the past and how you've handled it at the roles that you've had?
Right. Well, definitely a CFO is always concerned about cash. So, bringing in the cash and the AR is the number one way, correct? So, depending on the size of the company, it's going to depend on the level that the CFO's involved. When I was at Integra, it was a big part of my job because I was building the finance team, I was building the processes. And so I did have a lot of my time spent on, how are we making sure that our cash conversion cycle is favorable to us. So, and the big formula component there is, are we collecting our cash? Is anything, at risk of being collected? So,
Absolutely, absolutely. So, do you think that you've ever had struggles with the accounting department versus the sales department? Do you see the fights there a lot? I mean, is it a struggle between the two
well,
departments?
I like to say there should be a healthy tension there. When you have, the sales person may be wanting to, always do what the customer wants, give them a little extra time. And then the accounting department's wanting to, follow their guidelines, make sure they're staying in their credit limits, so on and so forth. So it has to be seen as a partnership, but also being able to see both sides. I think the best answer to that of what causes a good success there is an education about both sides understanding, what we're talking about. And so having good credit policies and making sure that, you provide that to your sales team, because then they don't have to be the quote unquote bad guy because, they say, well, the accounting department says this is our policy. And so giving that information and arming them with the tools to have that conversation is very important. And then also to go ahead one step further and explain to the sales rep what happens if the customer is late. So they understand, like, step one is we're going to follow up. Do we want to give the salesperson a chance to be that person to follow up, or do they want us to reach out directly? And then kind of like as it continues to trip into the next bucket in your aging, like what, make sure everybody understands what's going to happen, including cutting off further shipments, something like that.
Yeah, so definitely communication is key when working with the sales department so that they know every step of the way what's going on, and they're not caught off guard, right? Because I know a lot of people, in sales, I mean, they're very customer focused, right? Very customer centric. They're protecting their livelihood and their commission, right? And obviously their clients as well. But at the same time, you as a CFO and the accounting department, you're protecting the company's profits, right? And your profit margins. So a lot of times I think it just, like you said, communication doesn't always happen and those things get missed. So it's definitely something that people need to focus more on for sure.
Right. And I think it's sometimes too, it's an education across the businesses. And even with your customers, like when I was CFO at Integra, I would have conversations with customers and just explain to them like why we set their credit limit at a certain amount, what were things that I could advise them on, to just really build that relationship from the finance side as well. And I think that's what it all comes down to across business, across the board. I've found, relationships still matter. That's like number one.
Absolutely.
And making sure, who owns that relationship. And, like for instance, I wouldn't want the salesperson calling up the bank on my behalf because I own that relationship. And so that's why I think it's always good and smart for finance and accounting team members to give that salesperson that owns the customer relationship an opportunity to be involved in those conversations if they want to be.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So have there been any tools or maybe methods that you've tried to entice the sales department to work with you, or I mean, how to get some teamwork going there?
well, honestly, I think it's involving them in the entire process, like, and just basically understand. And, the sales folks lots of times are on the road a lot or out, but, being aware of like, hey, I know they're going to be in the office. So I just want a little bit of your time just to review things and just kind of get on a cadence, like get on their calendar, like say, hey, I just want to have a quarterly discussion about, what's going on in the accounts. And then also include them in like, just knowledge about like, hey, we're doing really good on our cash conversion. And hey, look at all these great things that are happening as well.
Hmm.
And so sometimes I think in just business in general, using a good example to help, use that as your communication piece kind of does a few things. So you say, hey, this customer that works with this salesperson, I mean, they are perfect. We want 100 of these.
Right.
So you don't have to even say, well, these over here are bad directly. You can just kind of give everybody what does success look like. And sometimes that's even a better communication tool than, pointing out all the bad things or, who's, maybe behind. And so then they kind of do it themselves. Then they'll follow up and say, hey, well, how can I be the person that has the best in class or the best customer, that's paying on time and helping us with our cash flow, et cetera, et cetera. So you can kind of use tactics. Those are just, it's not always the first thing you think about, but I do think it is a psychology thing. You have to change how you, as a CFO, I think you can be more successful if you kind of change your message based on the audience
Sure. Sure.
and use a little bit of that psychology and help them understand that you're on their side. We're all together on this,
Yeah.
and then also always make sure that the salesperson understands we need the revenue that you're bringing in.
Right.
This just happens to be part of the process to get it into the bank, and so just try not to make it the only thing you talk about. Like,
Right. Yeah.
like so that's the important part too. When you do have those conversations, be sure you're like, hey, this is what's going good. Here's some things we need your help on. And and by the way, you can use my name in vain as much as you want.
Drive the bus right over the CFO, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's like
Well,
okay.
that good cop, bad cop thing really does work out.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it does.
So I know, I've seen some companies that have like held commissions for sales reps until things come in, and I think you mentioned in a conversation the other day about maybe not all the commission, but half the commission, and it kind of got my wheels spinning and thinking. It's like, one of the big issues that I run into with clients, that get stuck having to place accounts with us is they'll have a sales rep that created a whole lot of sales, right? And then for whatever reason, that sales rep left. Well, then all of a sudden, all the problems come out, right? But that sales rep's already been paid. And then there's like all sorts of disputes that happen. So communication from the sales side broke down because they weren't relaying these disputes to the accounting department because they were just wanting to get paid because they knew they were hightailing it out of there.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, do you think that maybe holding back a certain percentage of every deal from a salesperson would go over well with a sales force, like maybe 10% or 5%, and then if they leave, right, and they have issues that come up, then you can have them help you work through those issues, or they don't get paid that rest of that retention until those issues get resolved and that gets paid. What do you think about something like that?
I mean, I think anytime, like the number one thing everyone has to remember is bonus and commission plans are, they're not one size fits all. And again, it's going to be based on the company, based on what you're trying to drive, what's the performance you're trying to drive. For some companies, it's not even an issue, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't even need to be considered. But for some that you do have that, one thought just to kind of like ease into something like that is to say, maybe you're still getting your quarterly amount, but that you don't get what we used to call the kicker or the extra at the end of the year, like based upon the overall targets. Those are based also on, a component of your, collections, like, and if there's any disputes or, things that have had to be turned over. Um, and it may just depend on the industry, and I'm definitely not an expert in every industry, but I think lots of times I think having the sales team help come up with that is a good thing to think about too. Like to help them understand first, like why is this important, and what would they feel comfortable with? Like, like what would they sign up for? What would they say, hey, I'm still going to work hard and get the sales, get that in. And yeah, I'm going to be your partner in doing the collection. What would be fair? And so, I've seen a few things and then talking to, colleagues, you can do like some do 100%. It has to be collected before you get a bonus.
Wow.
That's a little extreme. And the others I've seen have been more about the kicker or it has been about, like um, maybe it's related something more to the um, if they're on a stock program as well, like where they're doing profit sharing, they don't get as much profit sharing. So there's all kinds of things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think most sales team members I've come across in my life, if they understand what's needed, they're gonna go do it. I mean,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
just need to know. I mean, part of it's the number one thing is do they understand the whole cycle end to end and how they it's not done once they've got the sale contracted. It's till the end till the it's collected.
Until it's paid, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
A sale isn't a sale until it's paid. Absolutely. I agree with that. Yeah. No, a lot of people I think forget about that too. It's like they get really excited about the sales and then they forget about collecting them. And then that kind of goes to your point of, having a good credit policy in place, right? Like, defining what a good customer looks like, defining what type of credit that will be available to a good paying customer, a customer that's shown good pay history, right? So
Right.
a lot of companies really struggle with setting that process up in the beginning and they fail to really follow that process a lot of times because the sales department or other executives talk them into making exceptions of that credit policy, right? Because they have a feeling, and I talk about facts and feelings all the time. And
Yeah.
the sales department runs off of feelings, and we in the finance industry and credit departments we work off of facts, right? We know the facts. So, has there ever been any stories where you've had to really paint a picture of, hey, this isn't a good customer and here's why? Have you ever had to do that?
Oh, sure. And some of this is like when it's where I've seen this the most is where you've got a customer that's maybe been a long stand, a customer for a while.
Okay.
And maybe if you haven't stayed on top of like frequent reviews, things kind of like you don't really understand maybe something that's happened. That's the other thing that needs to be part of that conversation with the sales team is, hey, has there been any like significant changes in your, customers dynamic like that we need to make sure we're looking for? And so you can't just set up a customer and then 20 years later expect the same circumstances. And
Right.
that's where we've seen that happen. I've seen that happen with some customers where maybe it was a family business and there's been some change in who's running the business and and that's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And then things change. And so I had one particular example, no names mentioned, but that there was a family business like that. And, in the conversations we're going, well, we've always done this. We've always, you got to trust me. And so I, because of my time in working in controls and Sarbanes-Oxley, I used to have a banner in my office that said, trust is not a control because it's not that I don't trust people. I can't document trust.
Right.
As an accountant, we can't do that. And the same thing goes for credit. You can't just, unfortunately, it would be great if we could just go on somebody's word, but that's not what's going to work.
Yeah. No,
So,
it doesn't pay the
having a
bills.
conversation, like I remember having, like, felt like I was at a family meeting with this in particular business, and all the family was there. And I was telling them about, hey, things have been great. We love the long-term relationship. We just have to change and get back to some of these things that were happening before. And and so we did work on some plans about like, hey, let's get you caught up. Can we get caught up in the next 2 quarters? And tried to be reasonable and work with them. But I think the important thing there is, two takeaways is be sure that you educate your sales team to be watching for significant changes in the business dynamic itself, like who's running the business.
Right.
And also, just be sure that you're following up
Great.
timely so it
Yeah.
doesn't get too far down the bad path.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we close out here, is there any piece of advice that you would give, maybe somebody that's new in credit and finance, or even a new CFO? What's been the most impactful thing for you in your career when it pertains to just AR in general, or maybe dealing with sales and AR? Is there anything that you would say that's one piece of golden advice maybe that you could give?
Oh, wow, that's a good one. I would say have the conversation. Don't just send emails and talking to your sales team and, get on a call, good old fashioned phone call or a Zoom meeting or whatever if you're not in person, and just try to really understand each other so that you open up that relationship with your sales team first, make them part of your process, and understand that it's okay to stick to your guns.
Yeah,
Like, hey, this is our policy. And, so that's really not one golden rule. The only other thing I was thinking about was, you do have an opportunity to negotiate just about anything. And so as accountants, we are a lot of times very black and white. And I think it's good to come to the table with an open mind and just think about, like, it kind of challenges you to think, okay, my goal is to get the cash.
yeah,
Or is there more? Ask that question. Say it that way. Say, my goal is to collect the cash. And your goal is to continue making the sales, like talking to your salesperson. How can we figure this out together?
right.
And just so encouraging yourself to like be a little bit more open-minded about when you can you
Yeah.
know about that. So
Yeah, it's not so black and white. And you know what? I really loved your comment about picking up the phone and talking to people because, and not just in between finance and sales, but in business in general and life in general. I mean, things can get misconstrued, right? It's hard to get tonation and punctuation and all of those things that, somebody might leave out a comma, right, when they're sending an email and it might come off wrong. So, if you have a stressful situation, you have a scenario where there's, a heated discussion or passionate discussion, I'll say, where two people definitely care about the end result, right? They're both going to be passionate about it. And so if you have a conversation, nothing will get lost in translation like would in an email and a Zoom. And I think that's great advice. Absolutely. I think that's perfect. So, April, thank you so much for being part of this. I really appreciate your time. And as always, love working with you,
Yeah.
love working with your team, and excited to do much, much, much more. So
Oh
thank you.
yeah, let's do it. Thank you.
Absolutely. All
All
right.
right.
Well, thank you very much.
Good to see you.